Hi, my name is Russell Lucas, and I am a theatre maker, and I interview other theatre makers. So, in this interview, I talked to the playwright Martin Malcolm. I was particularly interested in hearing from a playwright in this series to get their perspective on where they are at in the industry. I had a hunch that, or have a hunch, that I think maybe the writer, in some minute way, is losing some agency within the theatre making process. So I wanted to put that theory to him to see what he thought. I also was interested to see to hear about how he handles feedback in the room, and does he ever let somebody have carte blanche with his work. So enjoy and click to subscribe. Hello, Martin Malcolm. How are you?
Hello. Can we take that again? Because I was just having some water. Just a minute.
Hello, Martin. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. Yes. Thank you for meeting me on Zoom to talk today. Um, I will have already done a kind of introduction video at the beginning of this interview to talk about how we met and how we know each other from, must be at least 7 or 8 years ago now, I think. But you're going to be talking to us about what I'm calling the writer's perspective. Each video is a thought on, so your video is called Thoughts on the Writer's Perspective, which we'll get to in a moment. But tell us about the type of work that you've done in the past. I mean, it's safe to say, because you're a writer, you work in new writing. That's kind of the default, isn't it? But what type of work have you been interested in the past that you've created, or what have you got coming up in the future as well?
Okay. I guess I started by writing comedy, and I wrote sketch comedy for 10 years for News Review in London, for the Treason Show in Brighton, and I don't write comedy anymore. I don't watch very much comedy. That's what happens if you write topical comedy for 10 years. It's sort of runs out of you in the end. There's no more left. So I don't do that. And I suppose when I describe my work to people, I suppose it's kind of gritty and miserabilist. It's not like I feel I am as a person, but maybe it's a reaction to writing that much comedy week in, week out and stuff like that. So what was good about doing that as a kind of apprenticeship is it teaches you lots and lots about structure and about delivering your writing to a team, and that team taking it on and doing something else with it. And so that's where I started. And I suppose after 10 years, I was all comedied out and I wanted to try something new. And I've ended up writing the kinds of things I write about, which are contemporary stories. And nearly always they spring from something that's happened to me or to somebody I know. So there's always a kind of autobiographical element in them somewhere. And they tend to be about personal struggles, about people struggling with personal events in their lives. I don't tend to write overtly political drama about issues. I think all plays are political, but I think mine become political because the issues, I hope, rise out of the story rather than me sitting down and thinking, okay, today I want to write a play about recycling. And I would never approach it in that way.
Okay. And then what are you working on now? What have you got coming up?
I've got a play about recycling, Russell. That's what I'm working on now. Okay. But that's just what kind of happened. It started as a play. It's about a road accident. It's about a friend of mine was driving home one night and they hit a deer on the road, and they didn't kill the deer, and then they had to do something about it, and it was in the middle of nowhere. And so that's where the spark of the story came from. And as it's developed in my head, it's turned out to be about recycling and about a rubbish dump I remember when I was a kid, where this accident happens, and all kinds of things sort of flow out of it. But I don't plan those things. They sort of come to me, and after a while, there's the story. And I start writing. I'm very excited. I start writing it on Wednesday. Today is Monday when we're recording, and it's a while since I've started a new play. And so that's going to be a very exciting moment for me. It's called Dearly. So it's called, which
Excellent.
Deer Leap is a very, very high hill in Somerset where I live, and you can see for miles from it. And that's where this play happens. And so I often start with a place or an event that's happened to me or to somebody else. And as the story develops in my head, and as I write lots and lots of notes all the time, issues do come to the fore. And it turns out this one happens to have a lot to say about recycling and also about what we do with the elderly when we stick them in care homes. So magically, those issues have sort of arisen, but I didn't set out to write about them. They developed.
Mm. That's sometimes the best type of writing, isn't it? When you set out one way and then it ends up somewhere else, but you're excited by that as well.
Yeah, I think so. But I do think that I wouldn't just sit down and start writing to see what happened. I know friends of mine do that, and it's a great strategy if it works for you. I would always know when my play was going to go before I start writing the first line, as I do in this case, because I spend a lot of time collecting notes and putting them together and thinking, oh, those ideas seem to belong together somehow. And then gradually they kind of, the story finds me, it finds itself. I don't ever think directly about plotting. Those things sort of develop. And then I think, oh, that's what that play is going to be about. And I'll usually have an opening line and a closing line, and I'll know the action of the play more or less before I ever start writing. Mm. And I can't imagine sitting down and just simply seeing where my typing on the keyboard took me. I'd never do it that way.
Yeah.
But I don't do what some people do, and very successfully. They write lots of little card indexes, and they research everything about their writing and do it that way. I'm kind of a bit organic in that way. I just let things come to me from the world.
Mm.
The world.
This is good because it kind of leads into the writer's perspective. So you and I, over the years, we've worked together as director and writer. You've given me feedback, or you've come to see stuff that I've written as well, and we've definitely had a nice, juicy relationship and dialogue about what the writer's role is in terms of the director's role, etc. That seesawing has always been going on between us. And there's a quote that I said to you about 5 or 6 years ago, and you said, I think that's absolutely right. I never forget when I said it, actually, because I was reading a book by Charles Maritz, and he said something, and I probably quote him very badly right now, but it's something like, the writer is the most imaginative artist in the theatre. And you said that felt true to you, and I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, I kind of get where he's coming from. That I think there is a real truth in that, because the playwright, obviously we wouldn't be there if the playwright hadn't come up with the actual idea of the world that has been created, etc. So I just want to park that in the whole interview. We don't actually have to unpack Charles Maritz's quote, as it were, but currently, where do you sit, you think, in the, dare I say it, the hierarchy of theatre as a writer? Do you think that the writer is at the centre of the theatrical, language, or what are your thoughts on some of what Charles Maritz touched on? Because I think that, and I'm willing to put my politics out there for this, that I think partly the writer is slightly sidelined now, a little bit. That may be the changes in the way theatre is being made. I'm not really sure. But where do you think the writer sits right now?
Okay, I hear you on that. I think that there are occasions when writers are sidelined, but then my view is they allow themselves to be sidelined if that's what happens. And I'm not sure I agree with Charles as much now. I don't think it's quite true that the writer is the most imaginative person necessarily. I think, although it sounds like a platitude, we're all imaginative. And I guess that's what happens when you work with lots and lots of people and you have lovely collaborative experiences. I think there has been a kind of growth in theatre of people who manage and wrangle writers and massage their product to be something a little bit more corporate or close to the image of the institution or the company or the venue. And I used to teach my student writers at university to defend their work. I used to say to them, you must defend your work because people will want to take it in a direction that you may not wish to go. I don't think that's quite the word I'd use now. I wouldn't say defend your work, but I would say stand by it. And I think, yes, writers can be sidelined. Like everybody in this industry, I quite often get asked to work for free, which of course I don't do. And I'm always astounded by people who somehow seem to think that the script already existed and they just needed me to hand it over to them, and it doesn't represent 2 years' work before it ever gets to a rehearsal room. So I think and I have got impatient. I've got less patient during my time working in theatre. So more recently, I've decided people aren't going to program my work unless I push it harder, and maybe I'll need to be a producer. And so I've started doing some of that, but I think it's a double-edged sword, and I think writers are not the best people always to do all the producing. Co-producing, maybe. You can get some say over what happens to your script and what happens to your play. I don't think it's right for a writer to sit quietly in a room and write a play, and then she or he hands it over to a company and something then happens to it, and then there's a production. I think that kind of old-fashioned model is not what I would like to see. I like to be involved. Doesn't mean I have to have the final say, but I think the thing that writers really need to have the final say on is who directs their work. I've had the experience of being told, here's your director, and I've had no say in the matter whatsoever. And sometimes that's been a brilliant thing, and new things have happened that I never expected, and it's been exciting and fun. And sometimes it hasn't been. And I think, again, I spent 2 years writing this script. I might not want to be the only person deciding, but I do want to have a voice in who then takes my script and makes a production from it. I think that relationship, the one that we have, which sometimes can be quite sparky and quite confrontational sometimes even, but we always get through it. And I think that's because I trust what you do and you trust what I do. But wouldn't it have been horrible if we'd been just pushed together and we'd never chosen to work together? And I think having choice is what matters.
Yeah, so it sounds like in some ways you have decided, albeit consciously or unconsciously, to take more control, to have more agency over your work. Would that be true, do you think?
Yeah, I like that word agency rather than control. I use the word control, but I think agency is what it's about. I think it's standing by your work, but not being defensive. And yes, that's been my experience. I've had brilliant experiences with people and less good experiences, like we all do. And over the years, I've noticed how hard I've had to work to get my work on, as we all do. And it seems to me strange to pour your life blood into writing a play and then to hand it over and walk away. And I used to think that was the right thing to do. And I still think that writers are better off not in the rehearsal room unless they're asked in, and that there has to be a breathing space where the writer gives over the play to the company and steps away so that other people have space to imagine and to do their thing, to find new things that the writer never imagined would be in their script. I think all that needs to happen. But also, I think that writers shouldn't just walk away from their work, because lots of things can not work out in the right kind of way. And I'm not going to go over all the horror stories I've had with plays where terrible things have happened to my work that if I'd been paying more attention wouldn't have happened. Right. But it matters too much to me to just turn my back on that. So yes, I want to have agency, and ideally I want to build a relationship with the director that I want to work with, and she or he is someone who I can trust and who might not agree with me, and we might not have the same ideas, but we will be on the same wavelength. And I think that is crucial.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that it's happening a lot over our industry, that people want more agency over the work they create. Yeah, and it can only be a useful and exciting period for sure. That's great, because then that leads on to my second question, because I think there has been a rise in the past 10 to 15 years of feedback, the rise of feedback, where
Mhm.
whether you're a theatre maker or a writer, um, whatever job you do in the theatre, there seems to be this fashion of you must ask for feedback, you must accept feedback. Um, where uh, I think it may have come from, dare I say it, some funding bodies that kind of need to quantify their choice of giving the funding to the particular artists, etc. I think it's probably come from that. Um, how do you handle feedback as a writer? Because I find it quite difficult, and I have to shape my questions rather than ask, "What did you think?" Um, how do you handle it when you're put into those situations? Or yeah.
Um, Mostly, I handle it badly. Is the absolute truth. It really, really hurts. Even if people say positive things, it still hurts. People can say the most wonderful things, and it will hurt. So, and when they say bad things, I get angry. I don't always show it, but actually, that's what happens. And yes, I think that you can see that in certain situations, and say with funding bodies and so on, it's part of their process, and feedback can, of course, be very, very useful. It's just the inevitability of it that I sometimes think is a little sad, that everything, as you say, must be fed back upon, and that's not, to me, how a creative process works.
Mm.
Imagine if I sat down to write a play and I sketched it out, and then I had feedback on the sketch that I'd written, and then I went on to do a bit more writing, and then people immediately came in and looked over my shoulder. That nothing creative would happen. And sometimes when people give you feedback, they mean well, but they're telling you about the play that they would have liked you to write instead of the play that you are writing. And that can be a problem. Also, feedback can be brilliant, and it depends how it's given. So, for instance, some of the best feedback I think writers ever get is that first time when they have a script and they either sit around a table or stand in the studio with actors, and they give it to the actors, and the writer shuts up and sits down, and the actors do their thing. And you can guarantee that what they do with the play is not what the writer would be expecting. There'll be new insights, and they'll do new and wonderful and exciting and imaginative things that would never have occurred to the person who wrote the play. And that is absolutely delightful. Every time an actor finds a new reading for a line that I hadn't heard in my head, it's magic, because the play sparks into life in a way I never thought it would. So that kind of feedback, which isn't a kind of formal office-driven process, is the most exciting. I think sometimes we have feedback for feedback's sake, and how I process that is I nod, and I often say yes, and then I just go away and ignore it. Sometimes I think the feedback I get is valid, and then I have to wrestle with it, because often my mind simply won't go where I can see the notes are pointing. And the notes can be very valid, and I can't make myself imagine the alternative to that scene or that moment in the play, even though I know that there's something missing there. And so that is a really, really difficult thing, and I don't know what the answer to that is. So I think most writers, if they're really honest, dislike feedback and find it puts their hackles up and makes them defensive. And that's not the right thing to do. And I suppose if there was an answer, it would be, I think it's good if you can choose who gives you the feedback, rather than having it foisted on you by people who decide they're going to give it to you whether you want it or not. And I think, again, it's the question of who's giving you the feedback and what it's for.
Yeah, I did. I wrote a treatment recently for television, and I thought I want another set of eyes on this, just to give me some clarification. And I thought about my audience, who were my audience for this treatment. So I sent it to two people I've known for 10 years, and they're nothing to do with theatre. They're school teachers, because I thought this is the type of thing that they would like. Knowing what I know of them, I think they would like this, and they're in my target audience. And it was great. It was so refreshing to get that feedback from a completely different world. And it was lovely. It was positive, but it was also super critical, but in a really lovely, generous way. And they actually found some plot holes which I hadn't thought of. And so I guess it's it's horses for courses, isn't it? It's what choose your poison. Which one do you like? Do you like feedback or you don't like feedback? But maybe there's no other way.
I think it's also what moment the feedback comes. So in the process of developing the play, if it comes during the final rehearsals with the deadline looming when performance is about to happen, that's probably the wrong time for any kind of feedback, really. So it needs to happen at the right time in the process. I think that's quite important. And then I think it can be fine. And as long as the person giving the feedback is very clear about what their purpose is in giving notes. I have a lot of writing students who I've worked with who often send me scripts asking for comments. And I've changed my practice over the years, because I used to just say what I thought. And that can be quite wounding, even if you're being as kind as you can be. Now I've learned this from you. I ask more questions. So rather than giving an opinion, I might simply ask a question.
Yeah, I got that from Lois Weaver from Split Britches. It was one of the things that I went on a workshop she was delivering, and she said ask specific questions on feedback, and it was just brilliant. So much better, so much clearer.
That's the answer. Rather than saying what you think should happen, is to ask a question about a particular part of the play.
And people will tell you what they think. So when because just as a caveat to what we just said, I guess in some ways there's feedback, like you rightly pointed out. There's feedback when you're doing a reading of your new text, maybe around a table. But like you said, there's feedback in a production, isn't there, when you're sharing it for the first time, or you're sharing it for the dress rehearsal. And you're right, it's when it comes, it's when it arrives. And I think you have to preserve that moment, and you have to pick your moment. When is it going to work for me to have feedback? When am I open enough to receive it, and maybe make some shifts to, there's no point in coming, we open in 2 days. Sorry, we've made our choices, we're now going to go forwards, I guess, which is interesting. So with that in mind, and you spoke about it earlier, at some point you have to give your play away, inverted commas. So how do you preserve it when you give your play away? So when we first met, I directed a short of yours, and it was a wonderful kismet moment, because you kind of said to me, it's yours. And it was it's 20 minutes, wasn't it? And we had a lovely team. Everybody had wonderful experience. So it's how do you judge that? How do you preserve what you've written when you give it to a production team currently?
Okay, well, the answer I'd like to give is that when that moment comes, I give it with all my heart. I take the play, I give it to the director and say, I trust you now. You're going to cast it, and you're going to take it forward and do your own things with it, and do something probably different than I quite expect. And that will be exciting. And if you'd like me to come into rehearsals at some point, do ask me along. That will be fun, but I don't need to be there. And that's the ideal, and that's what I still strive for. But of course, I've had difficult experiences with some productions, which is inevitable, and everybody does. And so I'm a little bit less open to that than I once was, but that's still what I would hope to do with a play. And I think the way that ideal production would work in giving away the play is that I want to have the choice over who receives the play and who directs the play. And I think that's reasonable for the writer, who's been the imaginative person in the story world up until that point, is for that writer to be able to choose their director and find someone they're interested in working with, who might challenge them, who will bring a different perspective and have a different way of looking at the play, but somebody I can trust. And if I feel that trust, then I'm very happy to give the play away. And I normally say, you can change any line. There's no line that has to stick. Anything can be changed if it needs to be. And I usually say that to the actors too. And mostly I mean it. And every now and again, every now and again in rehearsal or something, a moment comes when I think, no, they can't change that. And sometimes that can be quite a contentious moment, but those are always exciting moments. And maybe there's a bit of a battle over those, but mostly I'm very open to the idea that actors should rewrite lines that don't work for them or drop things that don't work for them, or directors should take a play in a new direction. But first, there has to be that relationship and that understanding between all the creatives involved, the actors, the director, the writer. And if that's the model, then yes, you should give your play away. And because you can't hold on to it forever. It's only a piece of paper, isn't it? Or a digital document. That's not a play, that's a script. And if you're going to be very defensive and directive over, prescriptive is the word I was searching for, over what happens with your script, it's never going to see the light of day, it seems to me. Or if it does, it will be a sad and lifeless production. So if you want it to live, you have to give it away. You have to let other people play with it.
Just as we've got a couple of minutes left, so extra question: do you prefer to be in the rehearsal room or not there at all? What's your theory? Because I think as when I've got my director's hat on, it's always a conflict, and I don't know how to solve it. And there's a very famous playwright who I won't mention, but that person is always in the rehearsal room. And I know from people who have worked with this person that they've said that that person really probably should be the director of their own plays, because they're so vocal in the room. The director is actually not really there for any other reason than to mark out the positions of the performers. So what's your theory on what's your ideas about that? Would you prefer to be in the room, or do you what's your preference?
I'm interested in what happens, and I do want to have a view of the production as it develops and before it hits its first night. I don't want to experience my play on its first night for the first time. That's true. But I think for me, if a writer is in the room all the time, that's a powerful signal, whether they mean it or not, that they don't trust the actors and they don't trust the director. And if they need to be there all the time, or they feel they need to be there all the time, then there's something wrong with the production team, it seems to me. There's not trust that there needs to be. And I like to be able to drop in and stay out of the rehearsal room. Mostly, I think the writer's job is to stay out of the rehearsal room. And when you are there, I don't always do this, but I always try to do this. Actors will turn to you and they will ask questions about their character. Of course they will. And they'll try and glean something from the writer. I normally, if an actor asks me, why does the character do this or say this, I will normally respond with a question. I probably won't answer, because often I don't know. And if I were to say, this character does that because of this reason, I've closed down the actor's imagination instantly, and I've set myself up as an extra director. And I don't think that's a good look. I don't think writers in general should direct their own plays, because you'll be blind to the flaws that are there. And also, I just think it's a collective effort, and everybody's got to have the space to imagine. And so largely, I think writers should stay out of the rehearsal room unless asked to come in, and turn up once, twice, maybe 3 times during the rehearsal process to sort of sample it. And if there's an issue or a particular reason for going in, that's a different matter. So I like to be involved, but I don't want to be around all the time. And actors, I think, can feel inhibited by having somebody sitting, judging, looking on, watching on, saying nothing, and sort of being a brooding presence in the back row. And I don't think that's at all productive. And so, yeah, that's what I think.
That's really lovely. It's a lovely, open, collaborative approach to making theatre, because I think, again, when I've been a director, to have the writer in the room, like you say, is a powerful thing. And there've probably been a couple of times when I've felt that my agency in the process has been removed, whereas like you say, you want the imagination of the directors, you want the imagination of the actors to then take your script, your piece of paper to the next level of whatever it is, and then you can come in at intermediate times, which is really the way that we've worked in the past, I guess. But yeah,
It is. And once when we were working, it became very vivid to me when we were working on Warped, and James, one of the actors, was talking to me about exactly this kind of issue, and he kind of compared it to how it would be if I was sitting and writing and my actors were standing just here behind me, looking over my shoulder as I typed, and it would be incredibly inhibiting, wouldn't it? And he's right about that. People need the space to imagine and to play and to do things their own way, and that's hugely important. And if you don't allow that freedom, the play will never live. People have got to be free to do their own thing with what you put on the page.
Thank you so much, Martin. That's
Okay.
it. Thank you for your thoughts, and see you soon.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Bye.